named Sheila Jacksonly. I call her Jacksonly, Jacksonly, just to kind of make her, just to spin her up a little bit. There's some folks trying to get in over there. And she's the person never to get between a camera and Sheila Jacksonly. It is dangerous to your health, unbelievably dangerous to your health. I know that because I was at a funeral one time for a lady who was really active in a crime, anti-crime group in Houston, who died in the TWA aircraft accident that went down off of Long Island. I can't remember her name. Pam Lynchner. There was a funeral over there, big church in Houston, and I knew Miss Lynchner, and I knew her husband, and at that time Senator Graham, and I guess at that time it was Governor Bush. People would walk to the funeral. It was a very high-profile funeral, and so Senator Graham walks up, and the press is there, and they stick the cameras in his face and the mic. Would you like to talk to us about Pam Lynchner? No. Governor Bush came up. Well, no, I don't want to talk. No, we're here for a funeral. And you see in the distance Sheila Jacksonly running from the parking lot, leaping over hedgerows to get in front of the camera. And so it just reminds me of all things that are wrong about politicians that are all kind of rolled into one when you think about Sheila Jacksonly. But anyway, I'm the land commissioner. I'm the 27th land commissioner. A lot of folks don't know what the land office does or the land commissioner does, but I'll just give you a little background. The land office is the oldest agency in Texas that's still in existence. The land commissioner is the oldest statewide elected official. Not me personally, but we've had a land commissioner longer than we've had a governor. Our first land commissioner was a guy named John Borden, B-O-R-D-E-N. He was appointed primarily because he failed to attend the meeting. And we have a letter in our archives of the land office, and by the way, land office has a wonderful archive. We have 35 million documents going back to the 1700s. Well, we have a letter from Sam Houston to John Borden. Said, "Dear John, we caucus seeking a commissioner for the land office. You weren't there. We picked you. We hope you will accept." And he did. He had a brother named Gale, G-A-I-L Borden. They were both veterans of the Battle of San Jacinto, and they both were from New York. And Gale Borden later left Texas, went back to New York, and went in the milk business, B-O-R-D-E-N. He was an inventor, really interesting guy. We've had some other colorful characters, but what we do, you've got to have a little history here. Texas became a republic, I guess you would say April 21st, 1836, in our final battle of victory over Santa Ana. At that time, we were about 212 million acres, assuming that the Nueces Strip, that area south of the Nueces, north of the Rio Bravo, Rio Grande as we call it now, and we had a panhandle that went all the way into Colorado. We were about 212 million acres. We didn't have any cash. We were in debt, dramatic debt, but we had this land. So Sam Houston negotiated a treaty with Santa Ana, and the boundaries were described when Santa Ana was a prisoner at San Jacinto, which makes the bargaining much more favorable to your side if you've got your antagonist, as a prisoner. So he negotiated the boundaries as it was, the panhandle to Wyoming, an offshore jurisdiction of 9 nautical miles, which is about 10.36 statute miles, and that's what we were. We didn't have any money. We gave land to veterans of the War of Independence. They gave grants to land to a league and a labor. The league was 4,428 acres. The labor was 177 acres. And that's what we used for currency, in effect. Then we entered the Union in 1846. Had a kind of a rough tenure as a nation because Mexico was always invading. We entered the Union in 1846. We negotiated this arrangement in 1845. And what was interesting about our entry into the Union is that we were a sovereign nation, the Republic of Texas. And we negotiated a treaty with another sovereign nation, the United States of America. That treaty was ratified by both Congress of the United States and the Congress of the Republic of Texas. So it's different than any other, territory that became a state. We were the only one that was really, truthfully a nation, and the treaty ended our our nation status and made us a state. And that's a very important point. But we entered the Union, unlike most other states, in that other states or other territories, when you entered the Union, you gave all of your land to the federal government, and the federal government assumed all of your debt. Texas, we had a controversy at the time also about slave versus free states. It was something that slowed down the process. So at the final analysis, what happened was the Congress voted to allow Texas to become a state, ratified the treaty, and we, unlike other similar situated territories or whatever you want to call them, we kept our land, all of our public land, and we kept all of our public debt, which was about $10 million. And our land, as I mentioned, was 212 million acres, went up to Wyoming. In 1850, in the Compromise of 1850, which was another issue about slavery and the westward expansion of slavery, where it could, that was part of it, we sold the Panhandle, the one that went to Wyoming, and became that iconic shape that we are today. When we're about 172 million acres, we're not really sure. Surveys in the 1840s were not all that good. So we sold our Panhandle, I think, for about somewhere between $10 to $15 million. We paid off our debt, had a little bit left, and we kept our remaining land, which we used to our benefit. We gave land to railroads to build track. We gave land to companies to build ports and waterways. We gave land to companies to dredge channels, and we gave land to a company to build the Capitol. We were still land rich and cash poor. So over the years, Texas has evolved into a state that is approximately, depending on how you measure it, somewhere between 92 and 97% privately owned. The surface area of Texas is, more than any other western state, in fact, probably as a percentage more than any other state, is owned by private parties, by citizens. The rest of it's owned by the federal, the state, and the local governments. Most of that is military installations such as Fort Bliss or Fort Hood. As far as state land, it's either prisons or parks. And then we have the land that I manage, which is university land and school land. And university land is the PUF, Permanent University Fund. It goes to help fund the UT and A&M systems. It goes 1/3 to Texas A&M and 2/3 to University of Texas. I'm told that's because the Aggies got first choice. I'm not sure that's accurate. And that's about 2.1 million acres, and it's a lot of oil and gas royalty income. Matter of fact, this past Tuesday, in one day, we made $44 million in a bid sale. And we put the tracts of land up for competitive bid for oil and gas companies to pay us to go look for oil and gas. And then if they produce oil and gas, we get a royalty of about 25% of the wellhead price. So there's about 2.1 million PUF acres. There's about 700,000 surface acres in the PSF. There's about 2.5 million acres submerged in the Gulf of Mexico out to 9 nautical miles. That's oil and gas royalty income and other types of income. And so the land office manages all of that. And we make about $500 million a year. Most of it's been on oil and gas royalties, but lately we've diversified our income stream. We have a couple of renewable energy contracts. There's no production, but we have 125,000 acres in the Gulf of Mexico leased for geothermal, 125,000 acres leased for wind, and all we've gotten is money, bonus royalty, because there's no production, so we're not getting production royalty. We even have a kitty litter lease in far west Texas. There's a certain kind of clay that's really good for kitty litter, and that proves that I'll do any shitty thing in the world to make money for the children. I have no pride, and we have a variety of other. We do have something really interesting and really pretty exciting. Y'all have heard of rare earth? Of course, depending on your age, that's not the 60s group. That is actually a type of mineral that's rare, found in the earth. But there's two kinds of rare earth. There's the really rare earth, or the heavy rare earth, and I don't know the names. It's a rubidium and rubidium, all that kind of crap. And it's used for high-tech stuff, missile guidance system, all these PDAs, all that stuff. It is rare, and Communist China kind of has a monopoly on the rare earth, the rare stuff. Well, maybe not for long, because in Hudspeth County, near a town called Round Top, or maybe it's Sierra Blanca, close to Sierra Blanca. which if you drive west on I-10, you'll go through Sierra Blanca, or you'll see the exit at least. We have we believe, a rare earth deposit that would change the dynamic on the availability of rare earth. It'd be a big, big deal for Texas and for the United States. The other thing I do is I manage the veterans programs. Texas has always taken care of our veterans. We gave land to veterans. We ran out of land to give away in the 1890s. Now we have a program that provides low interest loans for Texas veterans to buy land, dirt, or to buy homes. And our interest rates are about, on a home loan, we're at least 0.5% lower than market. In other words, right now you can get a home loan for 3.5, 3.75. If you go through the Veterans Land Board, a veteran can get a home loan for right at 3. As a matter of fact, we had loans below 3, up to $417,000. And we have the land loans as well. And then we have long-term care facilities. And the other thing, which is the most controversial, most difficult thing that I deal with, is the Texas coast. That's a pretty difficult balancing act because, beaches do not remain in the same place. They always move. And they frequently have been moving in the wrong direction if you're a property owner. And when they move inland, i.e. when they erode, it changes your ownership. That's the way it's always been. That's the way it's going to be. When you buy property on the coast, there's certain risks you assume. And the survey that defined that tract of land called to the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. And those waters move. They, erosion or accretion. And that changes everything. And so that's probably the most controversial thing. Matter of fact, everything controversial essentially lately revolves around Galveston. I don't know what it is about Galveston. I tell people Galveston is like the biosphere, except when you cross the causeway, it's like going into the biosphere, except there's no visible dome. It's a pretty interesting place. But the land office is a great gig. I love it. I have people that work for me that make even me look good. And in 2014, I'll be leaving. I'll be running for lieutenant governor. And my philosophy of government is that we have too many people that are focused on their next office, and whether they're going to be a U.S. senator or a president or a governor. I got a great job right now. It's not really a job. It's an endeavor of love. It involves everything about Texas. It all rolls it into one agency, but I really believe that we need somebody to preside over the Senate and to be a leader in Texas that really doesn't care about what the newspapers say about him, about who likes him and who doesn't like him, but who just believes in doing what he thinks is best without regard to the consequences, and always tries to give people straight answers. So, having said that, probably talked longer than I expected, or probably than you wanted. I like to tell people that, I'm your speaker. My job is to speak, and your job is to listen. But if you get finished before I do, feel free to leave. It's happened before. So, but I'm finished for a little bit. Happy to answer any questions or talk about the land office or anything else. Yes, sir.
How big is the permanent university fund right now?
The PUF, the total value right now, I think is about 13 billion. The PSF is about 25 billion. They both went down, about 4 years ago and then they've recovered nicely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, what effect does that have to do on university tuition rates?
Well,
we got this money that's set aside, but we keep hearing that tuition rates are going through the roof. How do they?
It's all part of the equation, but it doesn't make a big enough difference. The university fund funds only two university systems, A&M and Texas, and it's primarily used for capital expenditures, or for borrowing money, or for issuing bonds. Because if you have cash corpus, you can issue bonds, and you have it collateralized, and you get the best bond rating, and therefore you pay the lowest interest rate. I don't think it has any significant impact on tuition. I really don't. In the case of the permanent school fund, the same thing. Virtually all school districts that issue bonds have the corpus as the ultimate guarantee. And therefore, almost all of them have the highest bond rating you can get. If they don't have the highest bond rating, it's because something stupid the district has done like, issue a lot of debt when they had no growth to help fund it. So, but it's a very important deal. It doesn't provide much money, but it sure does help in the bond issuance. Which, by the way, we probably need to do something besides issue bonds in the future. Yes, sir.
Tell us a little bit about the policy for in the investment strategy for the fund. We hear a lot about it having a strong position in precious metals, for example.
Well, the Permanent University Fund investment is done by UTIMCO, University of Texas Investment Management Company. So that's a board appointed by the governor, and they are solely responsible for the investment of that corpus. What I do with the university fund is I generate income, and I'm not responsible for any of the investments. Now, when you get to the permanent school fund, though, I do have investment responsibility. This is kind of a, if you were to design a way to manage our PSF, you wouldn't design it like it is today. It's evolved, and lots of stuff in government evolves. And it's just band-aided, changed, but what's evolved to today is the Permanent School Fund is managed by two entities. One of them is the State Board of Education, TEA. That's our 15-member board. They're elected in districts. They manage a portfolio of about $25 billion. Starting about 10 years ago, the land office sought and has the authority to invest in real property interests. So my agency, myself and two other board members called the School Land Board, we invest in real property interests. Now minerals are a real property interest, whether it's hard minerals, whether it's hydrocarbons, it's a real property interest. And we do have some investments in hydrocarbon, oil and gas, and in infrastructure associated with that. But as far as precious metals, I'm pretty sure that the PSF, the SBOE has some investment, as does the FUF, but I don't know what extent that is. What I'm limited to investing into is real property interests, and that's primarily real estate funds as well as direct investments in real estate. And we do that, and that's kind of controversial, because when we do that, we are in effect, to some extent, competing with the private sector. So you've got to keep this balance here. But then the other choice is if I have a fiduciary responsibility to grow the corpus of the fund and to protect the public trust value, then the choice is to bury it in the backyard. So we invest, and we invest primarily in institutional funds that have other institutional investors. But we're doing it really well. Our last 12-month period, internal rate of return was 13.8%, and that included funds that were not invested. They were just sitting there in cash because they have yet to be called. If you take what we've actually invested, we're doing about 22.9%, and that is a very good rate of return. So we're hoping it continues that way. And we're very conservative. We're sitting on a lot of cash right now, but we buy dirt, we invest in real estate funds.
How long is the term of the land commissioner?
It's 4 years. All statewide terms are 4 years, except for Supreme Court, Court of Criminal Appeals, and Railroad Commission. Those are 6-year terms. But all the others, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, comptroller, ag commissioner, they're all 4-year terms. The 6-year terms are usually, 1/3 of those are up at any one time, which is really a pretty good idea. I'm one that believes that, I don't think any term for public office ought to be less than 4 years, because it's just too many damn elections. You got 150 House members, and they're up every 2 years. That means they need more money. That means they're going to be, sending you mail, or they're going to be on the radio or on TV. And members of Congress, you throw in the members of Congress, and then you go down to say a place like Harris County, where they have 59 district judges. 59 district judges, and they stagger. They're 4-year terms, but half of them are up every 2 years. You know, you don't know your judges. It's really, but you know, notwithstanding, we still do, it turns out fairly well. We have a very, very bad system of government, but it's better than anything else. Yeah, yes, sir.
So this land commissioner is up again in 2 years, and you're in 2014, and you're not planning running. What do we know? Who's interested?
I've heard a couple of names. George P. Bush, you know, Governor Bush's nephew, Jeb Bush's son. There's a couple of House members. I've heard House member from Corpus Christi chairs the calendars committee. Todd Hunter. I've heard. Pardon? I haven't heard him for land. I've heard him for White Gov. He's one of the cast of thousands that are looking at the lieutenant governor's race. Cecil B. DeMille Epic, I think. Hager's looking at, I've heard that, but Hager's kind of looking at comptroller. And then there's another House member from Montgomery County. But the only one that's, I have to tell you, George P. Bush came by the office and visited. And I was really impressed with the fact that he had a great interest in the office. I mean, you know, what do you do? I mean, the history of it. I mean, and then, you know, of course, when I leave, it's all up to somebody else. But I have a great affinity for somebody being in there that follows me, that understands and respects the history of that office and what it's meant to Texas. You know, and how much it's done for Texas. But that's what I've heard. Nobody knows until finally done. Yes, sir.
Do you see a distinction between public-private partnerships and corporate welfare?
Well, yeah. You know, the P3 is what we're talking about. P3. The legislature passed a bill enabling P3. Well, the land office has already done P3, and that we invest along with, you know, we public sector invest with private sector. And we get a return off of it. So we do have corporate welfare, though. I mean, it's. I have to tell you, one thing that I've been pretty active involved in is our Formula One debacle. I mean, it's an example of mission creep. What happens is they passed a statute that allows the state. Here's the premise. The premise is Texas is competing with other states for something, whatever it might be. All right. Let's say it's Formula One. And the premise is that if we put some seed money into that and attract Formula One to choose Texas as the venue, then we're going to make more in motels, in alcoholic beverage tax, car rental tax, and we invest. That's the premise. Makes sense. The problem is the mission creep. Give you an example. We have subsidized the Cotton Bowl out of the same fund, this event trust fund. Now, I'm wondering who we're competing with to have the Cotton Bowl. We have subsidized the Texas All-Star something game. Who are we competing with? Is the Cotton Bowl going to go to New Jersey? We have spent, that fund has gone from about $10 million in annual expenditures to about $75 million. And we're going to subsidize Formula One to $25 million. It's already here. So is it an incentive or is it a reward? And furthermore, and the thing that's particularly troublesome, is that the statute requires several things. One of them is it requires an application from the sponsoring city, i.e. Austin. When the Formula One chose Austin, Austin didn't know they were in the hunt. I mean, we have a statute, we have a process, and the process is supposed to protect abuse. When you ignore the statute, you set it up for abuse. And we have example of, for example, the Alamo Dome, the Alamo Bowl is subsidized. Well, where's it going to go? Is it going to go to the New Orleans Superdome? I don't know. But what happens is with those things, there's mission creep. Good ideas end up to have bad execution.
What's the current status on your efforts to preserve antiquarian documents?
Well, that's a wonderful thing. We have, as I mentioned, 35 million documents in our archives. We have documents going back to the 1700s, Spanish land grants, Mexican land grants, Republic of Texas land grants, State of Texas land grants. We have a bonus, or it's actually a bounty certificate, which was like your discharge certificate when you were in the Republic of Texas Army. And it was for a guy named David Crockett. And it says, having served honorably in the armed forces of the Republic of Texas until discharged by reason of death on 6 March 1836, you, your heirs are assigned to entitled to 1,280 acres. But it's a pretty illustrative, we have an issue today about immigration. And we have an issue today about whether, bilingual ballots or bilingual education. Well, we have historical examples that are pretty directly on point about that, and I'll give you a little example. Nothing new in Texas about, there are no new issues. We talked today about, well, how do we educate children who are primary Spanish speakers? And we use the term, do we use the bilingual method or do we use the immersion method? They had the same issue. When we had a governor named Paul Ferguson, James E. Ferguson, he was impeached and removed from office for selling pardons, among other things. His wife, shortly thereafter, followed him into office. Her name was Miriam A., initials M.A., called her Ma Ferguson. While she was the first lady, the governor selling pardons was so well known that it was said that if anybody bumped into Ma Ferguson and said, "Pardon me," she would say, "Oh, no, you have to talk to my husband about that." And then when she became governor, we had the same issue we have today. We had children who were primary Spanish speakers. How do we teach them? They didn't use the bilingual and the immersion terms, but Ma Ferguson was asked, how do we teach children that are primary Spanish speakers? And she responded by what I believe to be the most infamous quote in Texas political history when she said, "If English was good enough for Jesus Christ, it's good enough for the school children in Texas." I'm on the ballot in this state. I'm not going to argue with that. I know what it takes to win, but that's so we have the same issues. But in our archives, we have a wonderful document that I think is kind of telling. We have a document called the Board of Commissioners of the Bear District, and it was 1838, and it was the Land Commissioner Board of San Antonio, of Bear County, what is now Bear County, much bigger at that time. And in 1938, people would go to San Antonio to Bayard to prove up their service in the Army of the Republic, or to prove up they arrived here at a certain time, and they would get entitlement to land. They would get a certificate that allowed them to go out and locate land, survey it, bring it back to the land office, file that document, and get a patent. Well, people signed in, and there's a couple of pretty interesting names. David Crockett signs in 1838. We know he didn't, but then it says by Robert Crockett, his son and executor. 2 spaces down, a guy named Juan Seguin signs in, who was a hero of the Battle of San Jacinto and who had been at the Alamo, ordered to leave. But what's really interesting about this document is you look in the column that says nativity, and every Anglo name is immigrant, and every Tejano name is native. The first immigrants to this place were people who looked like me, and furthermore, the first illegal immigrants to Texas were Anglos, not Tejanos. And they weren't coming across the Rio Grande, they were coming across the Red and the Sabine, and they were squatters. You were supposed to be sponsored by an impresario such as Stephen F. Austin or several others. But no, people just said, "No, I don't have to do that. I'm just coming anyway. I'm going to stake out a little place here and I'm going to squat." And then when Mexico outlawed all immigration in the immigration law of 1830, they did that for a period of time, I think probably about 2 years. Then anybody that came, whether they were sponsored by an impresario or not, was an illegal immigrant, and they were coming. So when I go to an event and somebody is so mad about illegal immigration, they spit when they talk. And I'm a 5th generation Texan. I always like to say, well, did your family come here legally? Did you just make them think about it? But we have a long tradition of illegal immigration. We have a long tradition of border violence. Go back to 1916 when we had, Blackjack Pershing had to go on a punitive expedition after Pancho Villa when he invaded New Mexico and Columbus, New Mexico, or the cross-border. There's nothing new, and a lot of it's all in our archives. Anyway, lots of good examples. Yes, sir.
I want to ask you about the effect of the land sales on local governments with regards to ad valorem taxes. I know from San Marcos, go down
Right.
I-35. There's some property there that has been involved that if it's sold, the city is not going to get any of the ad valorem taxes off of that if people are there. So that caused a lot of rift with where
Yeah.
other things were sold.
If it's sold, they will get ad valorem taxes, but while we own it, they don't.
And that, and as well as the university impact of
Yeah.
those on local governments, just, you know,
Yeah.
kind of some general.
It's a really
tenets
good,
there.
and it's a, when the state owns something, we don't pay taxes on it. So therefore, if we buy land in Hayes County, and it was on the tax rolls, and then we own it, it's off the tax rolls. However, what we do is we do not buy any land that is not ag exempted. Therefore, it's on the tax rolls, but it ain't paying much. And then when the good news is that when we sell it, it has an established value, and we never sell it into another subsequent ag use. It's always been sold for development or subdivision. So what happens is, while it's in our ownership, it's actually owned by the PSF. It's not generating any ad valorem taxes, but in every case so far, it goes back on the tax rolls at a substantially greater valuation than it was before. An example of that is in Chambers County. We bought 400 acres, actually we did buy it, but the net result was, anyway, 400 acres owned by the Permanent School Fund, was ag exempted. Walmart put a port of entry distribution warehouses, two 2 million square foot warehouses on that. Prior to our involvement, the total ad valorem taxation annually was about $6,000. After, and this is interesting, part of tax law, we owned it, we owned the dirt, we owned the building, and we leased it back to Walmart, so they didn't have to pay taxes on the dirt and building, because it was owned by the state, leased back. But they pay taxes on the business, personal property, the inventory, and the leasehold interest. So their actual tax revenues went from $6,000 a year to about $1.8 million. And that was with the dirt in the building off the tax rolls. And now it's back completely on the tax rolls because Walmart bought us out, as was their option. So the point is, though, be very well taken. You have to be very careful. Over in Burleson County, we bought a 10,000-acre ranch from a family, from an Italian guy, which everybody said, oh, you're buying it from so-and-so. I said, who's that? I didn't know, but from the Benetton. They make clothes, I think. I didn't know anything about them, but it was like, oh, you're buying Benetton ranch. Well, I don't know. I don't know where. But anyway, so we made the seller make a cash payment to the local taxing entities until the ranch that they had was basically not operational, until that the local sales tax revenue increased to what it was before when it became operational. So we're very cognizant. You have a really good point though. Government owns it, it ain't paying taxes.